When you work as a fantasy football analyst on YouTube, we're going to get things right and we're going to get things wrong. I think the most important thing about this is that I need to take accountability for things that I got right and things that I got wrong, because I don't think if you're not transparent, you can move forward and just be honest about what was right and what was wrong, and therefore people won't trust you. So I've always been big on calling out my best and worst takes. So we're going to go through my best and worst takes of 2025. Sorry if I sound a little sick. Been dealing with a little sickness lately, but we're going to get through this because I want to make sure this video is out there to you guys. So I want to go through the first thing that I got right, and this dates back to about like May or June or something like that. And when you're looking at the Chicago Bears and what they're doing now, obviously hindsight's 2020. You bring in Ben Johnson and he does what he does to that running game, and it's like that running game was the same thing in Detroit, except just on a higher end because he had Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. Well, now this time around, he has DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monangai, and that was why I was saying when DeAndre Swift was being drafted in the mid-rounds of your draft at the beginning of last season, it didn't make a lot of sense to me. I thought he was a great value. So we're going to go through one of the videos that I did about best discounts in 2025 fantasy football, and I made this video May 26th, so we're going to go ahead and watch my take. I'll give you live feedback and reactions of me watching this video. Jumping out to our next guy right here, I also really like this price with DeAndre Swift. DeAndre Swift is the running back 27, 82 ADP in underdog drafts. Now, he's my running back 19, so I've got him 8 spots above where underdog is placing him in their ADP value system. Again, I love this price. Now, one of my most drafted players this year so far is DeAndre Swift. But I will acknowledge negatives here before I get into any positives with DeAndre Swift, because I think they're very glaring. Now, while I do love Ben Johnson, who is the new head coach in Chicago, you cannot say that this has been DeAndre Swift's best situation. It simply has not been. He was with Philadelphia in 2023, and ironically, he had his worst fantasy football finish. He was a running back 23. That was the worst finish of his entire career in fantasy football, with the best offensive line and arguably the best offense. That's inexcusable. It's disgraceful, as a matter of fact. Maybe he's just not that good. I've always said that about DeAndre Swift. But here's the deal. I actually still kind of believe that same thing. I don't think that he is that good. But here's why I like him in 2025 fantasy football more than I've liked him probably since he was a rookie. So he does get Ben Johnson, who, again, I do really like as an offensive mind in the NFL. Now, one of the first things that really good offensive coaches do in the NFL when they take over a team, Sean McVay did this, Andy Reid did this when he took over Kansas City, they invest and build the offensive line upon arrival. That's exactly. I think that's really the big thing about what DeAndre Swift was stepping into that I loved, is that you see with good offensive coaches, they come in right away and they fix the offensive line. And I think it kind of stretches further than that, right? Because one of the things I said in there was that DeAndre Swift's best situation actually was with Philadelphia, when he actually had one of his worst, I think it was his worst season in fantasy football as a pro. So I don't think it all has to do with the offensive line. But this kind of ties into what I said about the Lions all offseason as well, when I was discussing how I didn't like David Montgomery. I didn't love Jameson Williams. Now that one, Jameson Williams did actually pretty good, but David Montgomery was not the same this year. Well, the reason is because it's deeper than just the offensive line. There's very few coaches, and I would say Ben Johnson is by far and away the best at it, that can utilize 2 different running backs to perfection. And that's why I loved Swift this year, is because Ben Johnson, I think, is one of those unique running offensive coordinators that just has such a great eye for scheme and for just play calling when it comes to running the ball. So DeAndre Swift, as one of the bigger steals in drafts this year, that was definitely something I was right on. Now let's get into something I was definitely wrong about. This one is actually pretty funny, because I actually called Drake May one of the worst picks that you can make in fantasy football this year. And really the bottom line with that one is that most of it had to do with Mike Vrabel. Now that sounds weird, right? Like Mike Vrabel, I've always said, is an elite coach. I love Mike Vrabel, but he also has never been exactly the most pass-heavy guy. Now we're going to go through and I'm going to watch my full take on this one. You'll see me cringe on this one because I definitely got this one really, really wrong. So let's go ahead and tune into this take right here. Guy that I want to go through today. This is also going to catch people off guard. I've got Drake May. I do not like Drake May in 2025 fantasy football. He's the quarterback 16, 123.5 ADP. So it's not like he's super expensive or anything like that, right? And I get it. I am definitely going to get some pushback with this one in particular here because Drake May is obviously in a much better situation in 2025 than he was in 2024. Much better head coach, theoretically better weapons, theoretically better offensive line. Everything should be in place for him to take a sophomore leap. But Mike Vrabel, while I do like him as a coach, there's a lot of history here that needs to be addressed from a fantasy football perspective when it comes to his quarterbacks. So obviously, when he was with Tennessee, Ryan Tannehill was his quarterback in Tennessee. Now, Ryan Tannehill had 2 top 12 seasons as a quarterback in fantasy under Mike Vrabel. Now, again, that's like one of those situations where you could be like, well, Ryan Tannehill is nowhere near the talent of Drake May. And I would agree with you on that. He is nowhere near the talent that Drake May is, absolutely. So I will hear you out on that argument. But I will also just say, I'm sorry, you're flat out wrong. Unfortunately, you are wrong. Because this is a coaching philosophy with Mike Vrabel here. Because let's look at every single season that he was the head coach at Tennessee, what they did with their pass attempts, how many pass attempts they threw on a yearly basis, and where that ranked in the league. So 2018, 437 pass attempts, 31st in the league, almost dead last. 2019, 448 pass attempts, 31st. Keep in mind, that was the year they drafted A.J. Brown, and he was an immediate hit right out of the gate. 2020, 485 passing yards, 30th in the league. So second year of A.J. Brown was a stud that year as well. They still were in the bottom 3 teams of NFL pass attempts. That's just not good. 2021 was actually their outlier season. They had 535 pass attempts for 25th in the league. So that's really where the majority of it was based off of, is that, in my opinion, before the season started, it wasn't just a Ryan Tannehill thing, right? Ryan Tannehill, when Mike Vrabel was the head coach over there, wasn't a very good quarterback. So a lot of what Mike Vrabel had to do offensively was manage him. He was going to have to be a game manager when they had Derrick Henry to just run the ball into oblivion. New England, first of all, doesn't have Derrick Henry, and Drake May is just a much more talented player. So my bet before the season was that it was a philosophy thing. Now, I think it's ultimately, obviously, this one's so off base. Like, Drake May is the quarterback 2 right now in fantasy football, only behind Josh Allen. The guy's been pretty tremendous this year all season. So this was easily one of my worst takes because really, when it comes down to it, if you see a better talent, most of the time, that's going to work out better with a really good coach, which Mike Vrabel is. That was never my debate. My debate entirely was I think it's more of a philosophy thing. They want to run the ball a lot, where I think now it's been proven Drake May, when you've got that type of talent at quarterback, you might as well utilize it to his fullest of ability, and that's exactly what they did this year. So I was really, really off base on this one. Now, something else I got right during this season was back at the beginning of the offseason. I'm going to stay back here in this early May, late June situation over here because Justin Jefferson is someone I've talked about all season long. Everybody knows that has been a regular viewer of this channel. I never loved Justin Jefferson that much. Now, we're going to go back to a May 5th wide receiver ranking video, and you're going to see how low I put him. Now, to be clear, this is not me claiming that I was right and I had him ranked as like a wide receiver 26. I was not that far low on him because I still believe in the talent of Justin Jefferson. But me ranking him where I ranked him, and you're going to see that here in a minute, was completely a statement ranking for this particular season, and it turned out to be right in that statement. So you can kind of judge whether you think this classifies as a what I got right take right here. We'll go ahead and watch this take I had on Justin Jefferson all the way back in early May. I've already gotten pushback for my Justin Jefferson take this offseason. I get it. JJ's a great player and everything like that. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't draft Justin Jefferson. My point on this is that if you're looking at the range of outcomes for some of the top players in fantasy drafts, Justin Jefferson is kind of being priced to like his ceiling. And of course, like he's a great player, he has a great ceiling and everything. But this is the second straight year where there's been a quarterback change. And on top of that,
This quarterback that they're switching to is not exactly known for having a laser arm like Sam Darnold. He's also not coming from a school where he threw 30, 35 times a game. That just did not happen in Michigan. Like, Michigan had him running the ball primarily, throwing 15 to 20 times per game. I don't know if he can fill those shoes. And I think that Justin Jefferson will be kind of pushed up against the grain here to get the most out of this whole situation.
That was what the entirety of the argument was, guys. It never had to do with the talent of Justin Jefferson. Although I will say this, I just don't feel like he is without blame in this situation, at least to a certain degree. That's just me being completely honest. But the majority of the problem I had here was because J.J. McCarthy was someone I just didn't trust. If you look back to the offseason, there were so many reports out that were mixed reviews on J.J. McCarthy from Minnesota. There was really positive propaganda pieces, and then there was other pieces that were very honest. And there's a reason why they wanted to bring back Sam Darnold. There's a reason why they wanted to bring in Aaron Rodgers, and they were competing with Pittsburgh to bring him in. So it just, everything was there. All the signs were there at the beginning of the season with this one. And I'm not saying Justin Jefferson can't get back to that. But when we head into next year, unless there's going to be a change at quarterback, I find it very unlikely they're going to roll into 2026 with J.J. McCarthy there. Of course, we'll talk more about it next fantasy season during the offseason about what they're doing at quarterback, because I'm imagining it's not going to be the same. But the reason why he was ranked lower, and he wasn't ranked super low, but it was a statement ranking putting him behind Puka Nacua, Amon-Ra St. Brown, which, by the way, were better picks than Justin Jefferson. And that reason was because of J.J. McCarthy. Now, here's something I got wrong as well. This one is also really funny because I did a rankings list of overvalued players, very close to the NFL season start, actually, where I went through and I ranked the top 10 most overvalued players in fantasy football drafts, basically telling you guys you need to stay away from these players and their draft prices. So when we look at one guy in particular, yes, he did not finish the NFL fantasy season, but at the same time, what he had done up to that point, it was completely justified to pick him exactly where you were taking him. At the time, I did not agree with this because there's a lot of research that would have backed me up on it originally, but he obviously is an outlier. Davante Adams is a great player, and I did not trust it during the offseason. So we're going to go through and watch this take because I had Davante Adams as one of the most overrated and overranked players in 2025. So here it is.
This is going to hurt a lot of people because I have probably not been as transparent about my distrust of Davante as I should have been. I've been more torn about Davante longer than you know. And there's one specific reason why. Because on the one hand, I love Davante Adams. He's one of my favorite receivers of the last decade. This guy is an elite route runner in his prime. And even last year, like, we didn't really see any signs of slowing down necessarily. More just a sign of, turbulence of his season. But there is history out there that I've been covering for years now that does not suit him. So what I've done over the last 11 seasons at this point was I wanted to look at the wide receivers who went on top 12 consecutive runs as a fantasy wide receiver. And basically I just kind of wanted to see, how many of these guys could do 5 or more consecutive runs, and how many of them ended a run and then started a different run. So what you can see on here, and we're not going to go through all these players, but you can see the player, the consecutive number of years straight of top 12 fantasy points scored at the wide receiver position at an overall year finish, and when the run began and when it ended. Now, I also give the reason it ended, and I wanted to see if he ever returned to the top 12 after the run ended. And the following of consecutive seasons that he did return at, if he did return, is also there as well. And I also wanted to see the age when the run ended and the age when the second run started if they had a second run. So what you can see here, if you want to highlight Davante Adams, is that Davante Adams came in and he was an immediate great player basically after the first year of his rookie season. So what you don't see here is that Davante Adams had 2 top 12 seasons, non-consecutive in fantasy football, before he started this 4 consecutive season run between 2022 that just ended in 2024. But what we did see is 6 total Davante Adams top 12 seasons throughout his entire career. Now, if you want to look at the top 2 guys on this list over the last 11 seasons, what we see is that Antonio Brown, Hall of Famer, Julio Jones, possibly Hall of Famer, had 6 consecutive seasons as a top 12 guy. So he is right there at that peak number right here. And we have not seen a wide receiver come into his age range at 32 and start another run.
So that was the history behind it, right? If you were paying attention throughout that whole thing, it basically was research that I've done for many years now about wide receivers who have been top 12 guys on a sustainable basis and when the run ended and if they're able to start another run and at what age. There's a lot of factors that go into the research. Now, it's helped me identify landmines like Tyreek Hill, like Mike Evans, who were basically destroyed this year by injury. Now, Davante Adams is, again, the exception to the rule this year because Davante Adams is still the wide receiver 8 in full PPR fantasy football formats because of the fact that this guy has been a touchdown monster this year. I think Davante Adams is just one of those unique players that I needed to give more respect to. And that's just me being completely honest. I've always loved Davante Adams as a player. He's been one of my favorite route runners over the years, and he's just one of my favorite receivers of all time. And I did not give enough respect to Davante Adams, and it needs to be called out for sure. Now, here's something I got right, and I want to shift more towards the in-season takes. These last 2 takes are going to be in-season takes that really stand out to me looking back on the season. So week 1 fantasy football, I always say, is the hardest week to make predictions because you kind of are just operating based on assumptions of situations, on players, on coaches, everything. You have not seen anything for the particular fantasy season in week 1. And so a lot of week 1 is assumptions. However, one thing I've always felt very confident about entering every single season is the Cincinnati Bengals. And the Bengals with Zach Taylor as that head coach have been abysmal in September, particularly in their first 2 games. They were 1-9 heading into 2025 with Zach Taylor. That was a terrible team in the month of September. So I went ahead and ranked Joe Burrow and T. Higgins very low that week. I think I ranked T. Higgins outside my top 30, and I was barbecued over it. People were pissed about that whole situation, and I stood by it. I had a different video that we're going to walk through right here about going through week 1 fades, where I was basically reiterating the same point I made on the wide receiver ranking video just a couple days prior during that week. I stood by it. I ended up being very, very right about this call right here. So we're going to go ahead and watch that segment too.
People are going to get mad at me all over again because I've got Joe Burrow as my quarterback fade of the week. He is going to Cleveland to take on the Cleveland Brownies. And this one really goes hand in hand with T. Like T. Higgins, if you did not watch my wide receiver ranking video this week, I left T. Higgins out of the top 30. And it's been hilarious. People have been pissed about that one, calling me stupid, saying I had an AI-generated ranking list. The funny thing is, all of that is untrue, number one. And the second thing that's funny is that I think a lot of people will come to a realization that the Bengals start slow. A lot of people don't consider this in fantasy football. You see Bengals players, you think they're going to be good in fantasy, right? Well, typically that is the case. But again, you need to realize this. In the month of September, this Bengals team is awful. The first 2 weeks, particularly, under Zach Taylor, the head coach, this team is 1-9. 1-9. You heard that correctly. They are awful. If you remember last year, they lost week 1 playing the New England Patriots. Like, this is a bad team in the month of September. And this is a situation where divisional matchups are always wonky in general. But I would say that going to Cleveland is not an easy feat for a team that is not good at September. I think it's a really tough matchup, to be completely honest with you. Now, Joe Burrow and the starters, they did play during the preseason. That's the one thing.
Yeah, listen, when you're in a situation where you're making an unpopular opinion, be known to the public. And I think fantasy football is an interesting space because I think a lot of YouTubers in fantasy football, they kind of copy and paste each other's rankings and they kind of stick with the herd. I have no problem being on an island, and there's 2 reasons for it. Number one, if you're right, people will identify that and say, wow, this guy is a genius, even though that's not always the case, as we will see in this last thing that I got wrong. This always sticks out to me. And you could argue like the Kyle Pitts take in week 15 was a bad one. I didn't necessarily talk bad about him, so there's nothing to like really watch and clip in this one, but that one definitely fits in here too. But the Jamar Chase ranking in week 6 was one of my worst takes, and I got freaking fried over this take. And rightfully so. This was the time where they were still dealing with the situation with Joe Flacco. It was actually Joe Flacco's first game as a Bengal in week 6 versus the Green Bay Packers. And I had Jamar Chase really low ranked in week 6, and I was absolutely fried for it. And I didn't get it at the time. But like I just said, if you're going to stand on an island with takes, you have to be prepared, just as prepared as you will be to receive all the praise for being right when you're on an island. You have to be just as prepared to receive all of the slings and arrows of being wrong, because you will be the only one receiving those slings and arrows when you are the only one wrong. And I'm okay with doing both. So we're going to go ahead and watch that terrible take that I had in week 6 about Jamar Chase.
And then Jamar Chase at 20 to round out the tier at the Green Bay Packers. He gets a brutal draw matchup again, but in theory, Green Bay's defense isn't that good if you believe what you saw a couple of Sunday nights ago against the Dallas Cowboys. I do think Jamar Chase, coming off a massive week, is a sell-high candidate, because the reason he's ranked here is because this quarterback volatility is going to follow him all year long. He's going to have more games like he had the previous 2 weeks than he just had. So Jamar Chase is still an excellent player. He's still an elite top-tier player in the NFL. And in fantasy football, he can do that on any given week. It doesn't really matter the matchup. But I've got to put him here at 20 because the quarterback volatility is just that disgusting. So I can't put him much higher than this.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, it was really bad with Jake Browning. It was a horrible situation for Jamar Chase. So I went above and beyond, and I said, I'm ranking him at 20 this week. Well, he finished as the wide receiver 5 that week in full PPR. So I was definitely very wrong. Once again, you got to be prepared to take the slings and arrows when you're a fantasy football YouTuber, and especially if you're going to be on an island with your own takes. But I wouldn't have it any other way. I love this game. I love the game of football. I will always be back here very early in the offseason providing new takes for every new season, and I'm excited to see you guys back here this next season as well. Now, it's going to be good to get a break. However, I will say this, I will be active on my Dynasty channel, Dynasty Roundup, so make sure to follow me and subscribe to that channel if you have interest in keeping up with me this offseason. And I'll also be starting a golf channel as well, and you can see how bad I am at real golf. So I'm excited to take a little break, go golfing, enjoy some time off. But I love you guys. I loved how the season played out, even though it wasn't the greatest season for me. Week 17 this year was the first year in recent memory I wasn't competing for a championship in any of my leagues. No redraft, no dynasty, no best ball tournaments. I made it to week 17. So disappointing year, but I love the game of football. I love you guys, and I can't wait to see you back here whenever I see you back here. Peace out, guys. Have a good rest of the offseason.